I'm Stephanie, 31, and my daughter Grace is everything to me. She's 12, bright-eyed, compassionate, and more mature than most kids her age. Our bond is strong. So, when I left her with my parents, Harold and Martha, for a weekend conference, I felt uneasy. I never imagined I'd return to find Grace in a hospital bed. Recovering from emergency surgery on a broken leg and injury, my family made her walk on for 3 hours. We didn't have time for the ER, they said. Before I continue, let me know where you're watching from. Drop a comment, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear how I responded to an unforgivable betrayal. Being a single mom hasn't been easy, but Grace and I have built a life full of love and consistency. After my divorce from Mark 5 years ago, I focused everything on creating a stable home. Mark's job took him across the country. He provides regular child support, but his visits are inconsistent. Grace understands. She's always been wise, beyond her years, and I've worked hard to fill every role in her life. Mom, Dad, everything. My relationship with my own parents has always been complicated. Harold and Martha Wilson live in a scenic lakeside home about 2 hours from O's picture perfect with its cabin charm, forest trails, and private dock. Grace loves it there. But beneath that picture postcard setting is a colder reality. Growing up, I was never quite good enough for them. Harold, a retired surgeon, demanded nothing short of perfection. Martha, once a school principal, critiqued everything: my grades, even when they were A's, my style, my career. I chose teaching over medicine, which they've never stopped. Reminding me of, even now with a master's degree and a stable job teaching high school English, I still feel like an insecure teenager around them. Then there's my brother Jason, 3 years younger, yet always the favorite, the golden child. He followed in Dad's footsteps into medicine and is now an orthopedic surgeon. To my parents, he can do no wrong. When he earned his white coat, you'd have thought he'd solved world hunger. Despite it all, I've kept them. In Grace's life, she deserved to know her grandparents and uncle. They love her in their own way. Grandpa Harold takes her fishing. Grandma Martha bakes with her, and Uncle Jason tells flashy hospital stories. I tried to shield her from the same subtle jabs that had worn me down over the years, and mostly, I managed out. So when I was selected to represent our school at a prestigious education conference in Chicago, a potential step toward becoming department head, I made arrangements for Grace to stay with my parents for the weekend. It was only 3 days. It's just the weekend, Mom, Grace said while packing her favorite books. At 12, she was in that beautiful in-between stage, still my little girl, but increasingly independent. Her hair was pulled into a neat ponytail, her blue eyes full of excitement. I'll be fine, Grandpa said. We might go hiking to the waterfall. I checked her bag, slipping in an extra sweater. April in Minnesota can be unpredictable. I know you will. Just remember your allergy meds every morning, and don't let Grandpa load you up on sugar before bed. She rolled her eyes playfully. We've done this before. We had, but never for this long. Something about this trip felt different. Maybe it was the conference's importance, or maybe it was Jason's sudden involvement. He and his wife Megan were having problems, and he decided to spend the weekend at our parents' house to clear his head. His presence always shifted the atmosphere, amplifying my parents' disapproval of me. Friday afternoon, I dropped Grace off at the lake house. Spring had begun to thaw the woods. The lake glimmered through the trees, and the A-frame house my father built before I was born stood quietly in the sun. My parents met us at the door. Martha immediately criticized Grace's jacket. "That's not warm enough," she said, ushering her inside. "I've laid out more suitable clothes for the weekend." I bit my tongue. Grace gave me a small smile that said, "It's okay, I've got this." Harold barely looked at me. He was already telling Grace about the hiking trail. "The waterfall's beautiful right now, lots of runoff from the snow melt. You'll need good shoes, not those sneakers. I packed the hiking boots you and Mom got her for Christmas," I reminded him as I carried Grace's bag into the guest room. He nodded absently. "Jason's bringing steaks for tomorrow. He should be here by noon." Of course, Jason's arrival was the highlight. Before I left, I pulled Martha aside in the kitchen. "Mom, if Grace needs to call Mia, especially at night, please let her. Sometimes she gets homesick." Martha waved her hand. "Stephanie, we've raised children before successfully, I might add." The implication that I hadn't was loud and clear. "Grace will be fine. We don't coddle her the way you do." I swallowed my response. "She's been having some knee pain from soccer. If it acts up, there's ibuprofen in her toiletry bag." Harold was a surgeon for 35 years, she said curtly. "And Jason's a doctor. I think we can manage a little knee pain." When Jason arrived just as I was leaving, he barely acknowledged me. He went straight to Grace. "There's my favorite niece. Ready for an adventure with the cool uncle." Grace laughed, hugging him. I smiled, though it felt forced. Jason had always been animated with her too much sometimes, but she adored him. "Drive safe, Steph," he said. That was it. I knelt by Grace, hugging her tightly. "Be good, sweetie. Call me before bed, okay? I love you more than anything." "Love you too, Mom. Don't worry. Your conference is going to be amazing." As I drove away, I watched her in the rearview mirror, standing between my stone-faced parents and my smug brother. That image would replay in my mind again and again, my sweet, trusting daughter, surrounded by the three people who would betray her so completely. The conference began well. My presentation on inclusive literacy strategies was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. Friday's keynotes were valuable, and I made some great networking connections. Still, I checked my phone constantly, smiling at Grace's text by pancakes for breakfast, a woodpecker near the dock, Grandma reading her a bedtime story. Friday night, I called her, just to hear her voice. I tried calling 3 times over the next 2 hours, my concern building with each unanswered ring. Finally, around 9:30 p.m., my father returned the call. Grace is already asleep, he said bluntly. We had a busy day getting the boat ready. For summer, she was exhausted. Could you wake her up? I asked. I promised I'd say goodnight. Stephanie, don't be ridiculous, he snapped. The child needs her rest, not to be disturbed because you're feeling insecure about being away. I swallowed my frustration. Fine, just have her call me first thing tomorrow morning. We're hiking early. She'll call after we get back. Before I could object, he hung up. Typical Harold, always deciding what was best for everyone, without asking. I tried texting Grace directly, but the message didn't go through. I convinced myself it was just the lake house's spotty reception and tried to focus on prepping for my presentation. What I didn't know what Grace would later tell me through tears from a hospital bed was what Saturday had truly been like. That morning had started well enough, she said. Jason showed up before breakfast with donuts and over-the-top energy. My dad had planned a 7-mile loop from the house to the upper waterfall and back. Grace, a bit unsure, suggested the shorter trail she and I usually did. Mom and I do the 3-mile one, she said quietly. Your mother coddles you. My dad replied, you're old enough for a proper hike. Jason wants to see the upper falls. And that was that. What Grace wanted didn't matter, just like it never had when I was a child. Jason's preferences came first. They left around 9 a.m. Grace wore the sturdy hiking boots I packed, jeans, and layered clothing for the unpredictable spring weather. Her backpack had water, trail mix, and her phone until my mom confiscated it. No electronics in nature, she said. This is family time. The first part of the hike went smoothly. They reached the waterfall around noon, had their sandwiches, and admired the view, rushing spring water cascading over mossy rocks. But on the way back, about a mile from the falls, things went horribly wrong. The trail narrowed near a stream. The rocks were slick from the mist. My father and Jason were leading, Martha just behind, when Grace's foot slipped on wet moss. Her leg twisted unnaturally, and she heard a terrible snap as she hit the ground. She screamed. They rushed back to find her crumpled in pain, clutching her leg and sobbing. It's broken, she cried. I heard it snap. Jason knelt to examine the leg. His tone was clinical. Looks like a tibia fracture, he said. We need to get her to an ER. Grace felt a flicker of hope. Her uncle was a doctor. He'd take care of her. He'd call me. Everything would be okay then. My father looked at his watch. We have dinner with the Hendersons at 7, he reminded Martha. We won't make it to the hospital and back in time. Can't we cancel? Grace asked through sobs. It really hurts. Martha's lips thinned. The Hendersons are your grandfather's oldest friends. This dinner has been planned for months. Grace turned to Jason, praying he'd insist on taking her to the hospital. Instead, he shrugged. It's probably a hairline fracture. Not a big deal. Will I sit back at the house and reassess? But how do I get back? She asked, dizzy from the pain. I can't walk. Their solution still makes my blood boil. My father carved a walking stick from a branch. Jason suggested that walking might actually help, claiming weight-bearing could improve healing. It was a dangerously simplified take. And my mother simply said, we don't have time for dramatics. They didn't carry her. They didn't go for help. Instead, they forced my 2-year-old daughter to walk 3 hours on a broken leg. Grace said the return hike blurred into agony. Each step was torture. She cried until she couldn't anymore, then continued in silence. She begged for her phone. They refused. She asked to rest. They gave her short breaks, urging her along with reminders about the important dinner. By the time they reached the house, her leg was grotesquely swollen, bruised from knee to ankle. She couldn't take another step, so Jason and my father finally half-carried her the last quarter mile. Back at the house, they propped her leg on pillows, gave her ibuprofen and ice, then left her alone. Martha brought her soup and crackers. We'll only be gone a few hours, she said, as if that made it okay. There's water by your bed and the TV remote. Try to rest. And then, they left. They left her completely alone. In agonizing pain, 2 miles from the nearest neighbor, with no working phone. Grace tried to call me using the land. It was dead. A tree had taken it out earlier in the weeks, something they hadn't bothered to mention. With no cell phone, no landline, no help. She lay there, crying, hurting, alone. Meanwhile, I was still in Chicago, texting, calling, checking my phone every few minutes. As Saturday turned to night and no one responded, panic took root in my chest. By Sunday morning, I was frantic. I hadn't heard from anyone since Friday afternoon. I left dozens of voicemails for my parents, Jason, even neighbors. The final session of the conference wasn't until 2 p.m., but by 9 a.m., I had made my decision. I walked up to the conference organizers and said, "I have a family emergency." Then I packed my bags and started the 3-hour drive back to Minnesota. The whole way home, my thoughts raced. Was it bad reception? A dead battery? Or was something terribly wrong? That's the only word for what I found when I finally turned onto my parents' gravel road. My hands were trembling on the wheel. The first thing I noticed, all 3 cars were in the driveway: my father's SUV, my mother's sedan, and Jason's flashy sports car. At least they were home. I parked and stepped out, gravel crunching underfoot. No one came outside. No warm welcome. No signs of alarm. I didn't bother knocking. This was still my childhood home. Inside, the living room scene was almost surreal in its normalcy. My parents and Jason were seated around the coffee table, mid-game of Scrabble. Mugs of coffee and pastries laid out like it was any other Sunday. My mother looked up first. "Stephanie, we weren't expecting you until tonight," she said, as if I'd breached etiquette by arriving unannounced. I could barely keep my voice steady. "I've been trying to reach you for nearly 2 days. Where's Grace?" Jason looked up lazily. "Still sleeping. She's fine. Just resting after a little tumble on the trail yesterday." A little tumble. That phrase set off sirens in my head. What do you mean? What happened? My father sighed and set down his Scrabble tiles. "She slipped on some rocks, hurt her leg. Nothing serious. We've been keeping an eye on it." "If it's nothing serious, why didn't anyone call me? Why hasn't she called me?" "The landline's down," my mother replied, almost too casually. "And you know how bad the cell service is out here. Where's her phone?" I demanded. "I have it," she said without shame. She was becoming too reliant on it. We wanted her to disconnect for the weekend. I didn't wait for more excuses. I walked quickly toward the guest bedroom. Behind me, they followed, still tossing out justifications for why this was all no big deal. Then I saw her. Grace was lying on the bed, pale and clearly in pain. Her right leg was elevated on a pile of pillows, so swollen it was nearly twice its normal size. The bruising was deep, almost black in some areas. Her eyes were rimmed red. She looked up when she saw me. "Mom," she whispered, tears welling. "You came early." I was at her side in seconds. "What happened, baby? What did they do to you?" Through trembling sobs, Grace told me the truth about the fall, the awful cracking sound, the hike back while crying in pain, how they refused to believe her, how they left her alone while they went to their dinner party. I gently examined her leg, trying to stay calm, but my panic surged. Even to my untrained eye, the bone looked misaligned. This wasn't a simple injury. I turned to the doorway. He turned to the doorway. Made her walk on this leg for 3 hours, and then left her alone. She had ibuprofen. My mother insisted weakly. 2. Grace corrected softly. Jason, clearly irritated, said, "It looked like a hairline fracture yesterday. Kids are tougher than you think. She needs to be seen by a doctor." I snapped. "You're overreacting again, Stephanie," my father interjected. "If you'd just let me take a closer look." "No." I cut him off, my voice low and unwavering. "You've done enough. I'm taking her to the hospital." I scooped Grace into my arms. She felt so light, or maybe it was just the adrenaline. My family trailed behind, still trying to justify their actions, tossing out half-hearted offers of help. "Should we come with you?" my mother asked, as I gently placed Grace in the back seat of my car, her leg cushioned with pillows. I didn't even look at her. "No, you've done enough." The drive to the hospital was rough. Every bump made Grace wince in pain. I'd called ahead, so the ER staff was ready when we arrived. One look at her leg, and they whisked us into a treatment room. Dr. Rivera, the ER doctor, was kind, but visibly concerned. She ordered x-rays and immediate pain management. When she returned with the results, her expression turned grim. "Grace has a displaced tibial shaft fracture," she explained, showing me the images. "The bone has broken completely and shifted out of alignment." My stomach dropped. "The delay in treatment is our biggest concern," she continued. "Having her walk on this has caused significant soft tissue trauma. We're watching for signs of compartment syndrome, dangerously high pressure in the muscle that can permanently damage nerves and blood vessels." I could barely find my voice. "What does she need?" "Surgery," Dr. Rivera said, without hesitation. "We need to realign the bone and stabilize it with hardware. The orthopedic surgeon is on the way." I nodded, trying to absorb the gravity of it all. And if this had been treated immediately, her silence said everything. A clean break could have been casted, but walking on it had changed everything. As Grace was prepped for surgery, I sat by her side, holding her hand. I tried to stay strong for her, but the reality hit like a tidal wave. They had failed her. They had failed me. I had trusted them with my daughter. My entire world and they had abandoned her in pain, ignored her, cries minimized her suffering, and left her alone an hour later. My parents and Jason appeared in the doorway of the hospital room. Their faces were a strange mix of guilt and confusion. I didn't speak to them. I didn't need to. Dr. Layton, the pediatric orthopedic surgeon, arrived shortly after. He confirmed what Dr. Rivera had told us. Grace's injury was severe. The surgery would involve realigning the tibia and securing it with screws and a metal plate. There was also extensive bruising too surrounding muscle tissue that would need to be addressed. "She's strong," Dr. Layton said, and young with proper care, she recovered, but this should never have been allowed to go untreated. For this long, I nodded silently, because I knew the truth. This wasn't just a medical failure, it was a moral one, and it changed everything. We'll need to place a titanium rod and several screws, Dr. Layton explained carefully. In a child her age, we usually try to avoid such invasive procedures, but the displacement is severe, and there's significant soft tissue damage. Grace squeezed my hand tightly, her eyes wide with fear. Will it hurt? She whispered. Dr. Layton's expression softened. You'll be asleep during the surgery, and we'll manage your pain carefully afterward. The good news is, young bones heal remarkably well with proper care and physical therapy. You should regain full function. As they prepared Grace for surgery, I kissed her forehead, promising I'd be there when she woke up. The moment they wheeled her away, I turned to face my family, who stood awkwardly by the door. Stephanie, don't you think you're overreacting? My father began. Surgery seems extreme, Jason added. If they'd just let me examine her properly. Stop, I said, voice low and controlled. Just stop. We didn't know it was this serious, my mother chimed in. Grace hadn't said it was this bad. She was crying in pain for hours. She heard the bone break. I shot back. Kids exaggerate, Jason said dismissively, waving a hand. I see it all the time in my practice. They come in thinking they're dying when it's just a sprain. Something inside me snapped. This isn't just anything, Jason. This is a displaced tibial fracture with soft tissue damage. You're an orthopedic surgeon, you should have recognized how serious this was immediately. Well, we were out on a trail, limited visibility. He defended weakly. Then you should have erred on the side of caution. I shouted, drawing concerned looks from the nursing staff. I lowered my voice. You should have carried her out, called for help, done anything other than force her to walk for 3 hours on a broken leg. We had dinner plans, my mother said matter-of-factly. I stared at her in disbelief. Dinner plans, I repeated. You left my injured minor child alone in an empty house with no working phone because of dinner plans. The hen are very important to your father, she explained, as if that excused everything. More important than Grace's health, then more important than her safety. Now, Stephanie, my father interjected, his condescending tone immediately silencing me. You're being emotional. These doctors are probably overreacting to cover themselves legally. I've seen it countless times. I closed my eyes. Memories flooding in my sprained wrist at 10 that he insisted was just bruised, until the school nurse insisted on an x-ray. The time Jason broke our neighbor's window, but I was punished because Jason wouldn't. The pattern was clear. My concerns minimized. Jason's elevated. Grace could have permanent damage, I said quietly. She's 12 and may need physical therapy for months because you couldn't miss a dinner party. Because you couldn't admit that maybe, just maybe, her pain was real and significant. She'll be fine, Jason insisted. Kids, bounce back. Remember when I broke my arm climbing that oak tree? I reminded them, voice steady. You were there in the kitchen, Dad, and I received proper follow-up care the next day. You weren't forced to climb back down the tree on your broken arm, I added sharply. The waiting room fell silent. A nurse approached cautiously. Miss Mitchell, your daughter is in surgery now. It should take about 2 hours. There's a private waiting area for families, if you prefer. I nodded, grateful. Thank you. As I gathered my purse to follow her, my mother stepped forward. I'll wait with you. I stopped, turning slowly to face all three of them. In that moment, with Grace in surgery, I saw my family with complete clarity. These people, bound to me by blood, had repeatedly shown me who they truly were. I just hadn't been willing to believe it until they endangered my daughter. No, I said calmly. You won't, Stephanie. Be reasonable, my father urged. Reasonable? I laughed, a hollow sound. Was it reasonable to make Grace walk 3 miles on a broken leg? Was it reasonable to leave her alone in pain without a working phone? Was it reasonable to prioritize a social engagement over a child's health and safety? We made a judgment call, Jason said defensively. It's easy to criticize in hindsight. A judgment call, I repeated. Well, I'm making one now. I want you to leave. My mother's face crumpled, but Grace would have me here. When she woke up, she doesn't need to see the people who ignored her pain and caused her additional suffering. You're being dramatic, my father said dismissively. As usual, I conceded. Maybe I am, but I'm also her mother. And right now, that means I need to protect her, Evan, from family, especially from family. Jason stepped forward, expression hardening. You know, this attitude is exactly why Mark left you. You always blow everything out of proportion. The low blow was meant to hurt, to make me back down like I had so many times before. Instead, I felt an odd calm. Grace is having emergency surgery because you, a trained orthopedic surgeon, decided a dinner party was more important than properly treating her broken leg. That's not blowing things out of proportion, that's stating facts. I met his gaze steadily. Now please, all of you, leave. My father's face flushed with anger. If we leave now, don't expect us to come back. It was meant as a threat, but it felt like freedom. I didn't feel satisfaction as they stormed out, muttering about ingratitude and overreaction, only a deep weariness and concern for Grace. The surgery lasted nearly 3 hours. longer than expected due to the complexity of the repair. When Dr. Layton finally came to update me, his expression was cautiously optimistic. "We've stabilized the fracture with a titanium rod and screws," he explained. "There was significant soft tissue damage that needed attention, but we're confident we've addressed all the issues. She's in recovery now, and doing well." "Long-term prognosis?" I asked. "With proper follow-up care and physical therapy," he said, "she should regain full function. Grace would need to be non-weight-bearing for at least 6 weeks, followed by a gradual return to activities. The hardware might need to be removed in a year or so once healing was complete." I nodded, relief washing over me. "Can I see her?" Grace was groggy from anesthesia when I entered the recovery room. Her right leg was immobilized in a temporary splint until the swelling subsided enough for casting. Her face brightened slightly when she saw me. "Mom," she whispered. "You're still here?" she said, reaching for my hand. I took it carefully. "Of course I am, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere." She glanced around the room. "Where's Grandma and Grandpa, and Uncle Jason?" I hesitated, unsure how much to share in her fragile state. "They had to go, honey, but don't worry about that now. You just focus on resting." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "They didn't believe me, Mom. I told them how bad it hurt, but they said I was being dramatic. Uncle Jason said I was fine." I swallowed hard against my own tears. "I believe you, Grace. I always will. And I'm so sorry this happened." As she drifted back to sleep, still holding my hand, I made a silent promise to both of us. This would never happen again. No matter what it took, I would protect her, Ivan, if that meant cutting ties with the family who had betrayed us so deeply. The days after surgery were a blur of hospital rooms, medication schedules, and logistical challenges. Grace remained hospitalized for 3 days, her leg now in a temporary splint while the swelling went down. I slept in the uncomfortable recliner beside her bed, leaving only to shower and make calls to my school and Grace's. My principal was understanding once I explained the situation, and Grace's teachers arranged to send assignments so she wouldn't fall behind. Our real community friends and colleagues, not blood relatives, rallied around us. My parents and Jason made no attempt to visit during Grace's hospital stay. Instead, they launched a campaign of texts and voicemails, cycling between defensive justifications and accusatory deflections. My mother claimed they were giving us space. My father insisted the doctors had overreacted. Jason suggested Grace's recovery would have been easier if I hadn't rushed her to the ER and let him handle it. I read these messages with a strange detachment, like artifacts from a past life. Each one only confirmed I'd made the right decision. The only family member who reached out with genuine concern was my Aunt Eleanor, my father's sister, estranged for years. When she called after hearing about Grace's injury, her first words were, "What can I do to help?" Eleanor lived 3 hours away but offered to drive up the next weekend. "I'm not surprised Harold and Martha handled this poorly," she said bluntly. "They did the same when you broke your collarbone at soccer camp, told you to tough it out for 2 days before your coach insisted on an x-ray." I had almost forgotten that incident. Buried beneath years of similar dismissals, I thought that was normal. I admitted. "It's not normal," Eleanor assured me. "It's neglect, plain and simple." When we finally brought Grace home, our apartment presented new challenges. The third-floor walk-up that never bothered us before now seemed insurmountable. Grace couldn't put any weight on her right leg for at least 6 weeks, meaning she needed crutches to navigate even the simplest tasks. That first night, I helped her bathe, change, and settle into bed. Both of us were exhausted from the ordeal. As I tucked her in, Grace asked the question I'd been dreading. "Are we ever going to see Grandma and Grandpa again? Or Uncle Jason?" I sat on the edge of her bed, choosing my words carefully. "Don't know, sweetheart. What they did making you walk on your broken leg, leaving you alone when you were hurt, that wasn't okay. It wasn't safe." Grace nodded solemnly. "I kept thinking you would have believed me. You would have taken me to the doctor right away." "Always," I promised her. "I will always believe you when you're hurt. And I will always make sure you get the care you need." "Grandpa said I was being dramatic. Like you," she whispered, her voice small and uncertain. "Is that bad? Being like you?" My heart broke a little at her words. "Grace, listen to me. You were not being dramatic. Your leg was broken. Badly broken. The doctors confirmed that. And being like me, that's the greatest compliment I could ever receive, because you are kind and brave and honest. All the things I aspire to be." She seemed to accept it, but I could see the hurt lingering in her eyes, not just physical pain, but the deeper wound of betrayal by people she trusted and loved. The practical side of Grace's recovery was challenging. Our health insurance covered much of the surgery and hospital stay, but deductibles, copays, and upcoming physical therapy would strain our budget. I applied for medical leave from work, but it only covered part of my salary. My friend Melissa, a fellow English teacher, organized a meal train. Another colleague, Tom, lived in our building and offered to help carry Grace up and down the stairs. My ex-husband Mark called from Seattle, horrified by what had happened. He arranged for groceries to be delivered weekly. The hardest conversation was with Mark about my parents' role in Grace's injury. He'd always liked them, finding my complaints exaggerated. Now, hearing everything, he was stunned into silence. Jesus, Steph, he finally said. I thought you were just being sensitive all those years. I had no idea they were capable of something like this. Neither did I admitted. Not to this extent. Do you want me to fly out? I can take some time off. The offer surprised me. Mark hadn't taken time off for Grace since our divorce. No, but thank you for offering. We're managing, but maybe you could face her more regularly. She could use the extra support. Of course, anything she needs. He paused. And what about your parents? What are you going to do about them? That was the question I'd been wrestling with since the hospital. What do you do when the people who should love and protect you the most show such callous disregard? How do you reconcile family bonds with the need to protect yourself and your child? I don't know yet, I told him honestly, but I know I can't let them hurt her again. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, researching medical neglect by grandparents and cutting ties with toxic family members. The search results were overwhelming, but a link to a support group for adults estranged from their parents caught my attention. I joined immediately. That night, I consulted with Patricia Reyes, a family law attorney who specialized in child protection cases. I explained the situation, showing her Grace's medical records and the text messages from my family. What they did constitutes medical neglect, Patricia confirmed. As Grace's mother, you have every right to restrict their access to her. If you want to pursue legal action, we could potentially file for a restraining order based on the harm they caused. I don't think it will come to that. I said they're more likely to disown me than try to force contact, but I want to understand my options. She nodded. Document everything. Save those texts. Keep records of Grace's medical treatment and recovery. If they try to force contact or undermine your parental authority, you'll be prepared. As Grace began her long recovery, the magnitude of what had happened continued to unfold. Simple tasks like showering or getting to school became logistical operations. Grace, with the resilience of youth, adapted quickly to crutches and developed impressive upper body strength. But the psychological impact was harder to measure. She began having nightmares about falling and being abandoned in the woods. She grew anxious when I was out of sight for too long. One day, my mother sent her a cheerful get-well-soon card, no acknowledgement of what they'd done. Grace stared at it for a long time before quietly asking me to throw it away. They don't think they did anything wrong, do they? She asked. No, sweetheart, they don't. Some people find it very hard to admit when they've made mistakes. Grace considered this. I don't want to be like that, she said. I want to be able to say I'm sorry when I mess up. In that moment, I realized that despite the trauma and pain, Grace was learning valuable lessons about accountability, empathy, and self-worth, lessons my parents had never managed to grasp. In the days that followed, my parents and Jason's messages grew increasingly hostile. They accused me of turning Grace against them, of overreacting to a minor incident, of being an ungrateful daughter after all they'd done for me. Not once did they acknowledge the severity of Grace's injury or express genuine remorse for their role in it. For days after bringing Grace home, I sat at our kitchen table, surrounded by a legal pad, Grace's medical records, and a sense of calm determination. My daughter was napping in her room, exhausted from the morning's physical therapy session. Her temporary splint had been replaced with a bright blue full cast, her choice, and it was already accumulating signatures from the few visitors we'd welcomed. I began drafting a letter, not an angry tirade or emotional plea, but a clear, factual account of what had happened and what would happen next. I included copies of Grace's x-rays and the surgical report, highlighting key phrases: displaced tibial fracture, soft tissue damage due to walking on the injury, delayed medical treatment, complicating recovery. To my parents, I wrote, Harold and Martha, I am providing Grace's medical records so you can fully understand the severity of her injury and the consequences of your decisions last weekend. As her mother, I trusted you to keep her safe. That trust has been irreparably broken. Grace will require extensive physical therapy and may need additional surgery to remove the hardware. She will miss the remainder of her soccer season and possibly the start of next year's. At 12 years old, she has experienced unnecessary pain and trauma that could have been avoided with basic compassion and appropriate medical attention. After considerable reflection, I have decided to terminate our relationship. This is not a temporary cooling-off period or an emotional reaction. It is a necessary step to protect Grace and myself from further harm. Effective immediately. Do not contact Grace directly through any means. Do not contact me except through the legal representative copied on this letter. Do not visit our home or Grace's school. Do not attempt to use other family members as intermediaries. If you violate these boundaries, I will pursue legal protection without hesitation. I do not make this decision lightly. It comes after a lifetime of dismissal, favoritism, and emotional manipulation that I allowed to continue because I believed family connections were inherently valuable. Grace's broken leg has broken that illusion as well. Stephanie. To Jason, I sent a similar letter, adding, as a medical professional, your failure to properly assess and advocate for Grace's injury is particularly inexcusable. You prioritized dinner plans over a child's broken leg. Your medical license may permit you to practice, but your judgment that day revealed a fundamental lack of compassion and professional ethics that no credential can disguise. I sent the letters by certified mail, ensuring delivery confirmation. Copies went to my lawyer, Patricia, who helped me draft the legal language. I also changed both our phone numbers and email addresses, creating new ones that only trusted friends and colleagues. Had Grace watched me place the letters in the mailbox outside our apartment building. Her expression was solemn beyond her years. "Is this forever?" she asked as we slowly made our way back up the stairs, her on crutches, me carrying her backpack. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Right now, we need space to heal, physically, and both of us emotionally. Someday, if they can truly understand what they did and take responsibility, maybe things could be different. But that would require them to change in ways they've never shown the capacity for." She nodded thoughtfully. "I'm sad but also relieved. Is that weird?" "Not at all. It's exactly how I feel too." The responses came quickly and, predictably. My father's lawyer contacted Patricia with veiled threats about my mental stability and accusations of parental alienation. My mother left a tearful voicemail at my school, the only number she still had, begging to speak to Grace just for a minute. Jason sent a scathing email to my new address, how he found it. I'll never know, accusing me of professional slander and threatening legal action of his own. None of it shook my resolve. None of them acknowledged the harm they'd caused. Patricia handled the legal threats efficiently, responding with copies of Grace's medical records and statements from her doctors about the impact of the delayed treatment. The threats quieted after that, though the emotional manipulation attempts continued sporadically. Meanwhile, Grace's recovery progressed slowly but steadily. 6 weeks of non-weight bearing turned into partial weight bearing with a walking boot. Physical therapy 3 times a week helped her regain strength and mobility. Her therapist Diane incorporated psychological support as well, helping Grace process the betrayal she'd experienced alongside the physical trauma. My Aunt Eleanor became a regular presence in our lives, driving up every other weekend to help with groceries, laundry, or simply to provide adult company for me. Through her, I learned family history I'd never known, patterns of neglect and favoritism stretching back generations. "Your grandfather did the same to your father," she told me one evening as we shared tea after Grace had gone to bed. "Minimized his pain, taught him to suppress emotions, favored the son who most mimicked his stoicism. Harold became what he was raised to be." I said. "That explains it." Eleanor nodded. "But it doesn't excuse it." Understanding the origin of behavior didn't obligate me to accept its continuation. As the weeks passed, we established new routines and traditions. Sunday mornings became pancake breakfasts, with whatever toppings we craved. Friday nights were movie nights with takeout from local restaurants we'd never tried before. We even started a 2-person book club, reading the same novels and discussing them over hot chocolate. In place of the family we'd lost, we strengthened connections with the people who showed up for us consistently. Colleagues who covered classes when Grace had appointments, neighbors who helped with stairs and errands, even Mark, who surprised us both by flying in for a long weekend to see Grace and help with household projects. I'd been postponing 3 months after surgery. Grace returned to school full-time. Her mobility was still limited, but the walking boot allowed her independence. Her friends were supportive, visiting with homework and gossip to make her feel included despite her absence. Her teachers accommodated her needs without making her feel singled out. The support group for adults estranged from parents became an invaluable resource. Through their stories, I recognized patterns in my own upbringing that I'd normalized: the constant criticism disguised as concern, the dismissal of my feelings, the golden child scapegoat dynamic between Jason and me. I began to understand that cutting ties wasn't an act of vengeance, but of self-preservation. By 6 months after the incident, Grace had her hardware removal surgery, a less invasive procedure with a quicker recovery time by then. We'd had no direct contact from my parents or Jason for nearly 3 months, though I occasionally heard through mutual acquaintances that they were telling a very different version of events, casting themselves as victims of my unstable behavior and overprotectiveness. I found I no longer cared what they said. The truth was in Grace's medical records, in the scar on her leg, in the therapy sessions she still attended. The truth was in our daily lives, which had grown more peaceful and authentic, without the constant undercurrent of criticism and judgment. On the day Grace was cleared to return to all normal activities, including soccer practice, we celebrated with a special dinner at her favorite restaurant. As we shared dessert, she looked up at me with an expression of quiet contemplation. "Mom, I've been thinking about Grandma and Grandpa and Uncle Jason." My heart skipped a beat. "What about them, sweetie?" "I don't miss them as much as I thought I would." She traced patterns in the chocolate sauce with her spoon. "Is that terrible to say?" "Not at all," I assured her. "Relationships should add value to your life, not drain it. Even family relationships. I miss the idea of them," she continued, "like having grandparents who come to school concerts and an uncle who teaches me cool stuff. But the real them? They made me feel small, like my feelings didn't matter. They made me feel that way too," I admitted. "For most of my life." She nodded with understanding beyond her years. "I'm glad we don't feel that way anymore." As we walked home that evening, Grace moving confidently without crutches or limping, I realized we had both healed in ways that extended far beyond her physical recovery. We had rebuilt our sense of worth, our understanding of healthy relationships, and our definition of family. The painful incident had forced a reckoning long overdue, and through that crucible, we emerged stronger, not despite the absence of my parents and brother, but because of it. Grace's physical recovery had progressed remarkably well, as Dr. Layton had predicted. The second, less invasive surgery to remove the hardware had gone smoothly, leaving only a faint scar where the rod and screws had been. She'd returned to soccer, her coach easing her back with modified training sessions before clearing her for full participation. The emotional healing took longer for both of us. Grace still occasionally had nightmares about being left alone while injured, certain triggers, a particular tone of voice, the smell of pine forests. Even the sound of Scrabble tiles clicking together could momentarily transport her back to that painful weekend. But with therapy and time, these moments grew less frequent and less intense. For me, the journey involved unlearning a lifetime of conditioned responses. I found myself anticipating criticism that no longer came, defending decisions no one was questioning, apologizing for taking up space I had every right to occupy. Breaking these habits required conscious effort and constant self-awareness. My parents hadn't given up entirely. Every few weeks, a card would arrive for Grace, always cheerful, always avoiding any mention of what had happened, always signed with love from Grandma and Grandpa. I let Grace decide whether to read them. Usually, she didn't. They still don't get it, do they? She observed one day, holding an unopened birthday card. They think they can just pretend nothing happened. Some people never develop the capacity to truly acknowledge when they've hurt others, I explained. It threatens their too much. That's sad, Grace said with genuine compassion. That amazed me. It must be lonely, never being able to say you're sorry. Jason had moved on completely. According to my Aunt Eleanor, he told extended family that I had mental health issues and had cut everyone off for no reason. Few believed him, especially after Eleanor quietly shared the actual circumstances. But it didn't matter. Jason's inability to acknowledge his role in harming Grace only confirmed we were better off without him. The most persistent attempts at contact came from my mother. She left messages with mutual friends, sent letters to my school, and even approached Grace's soccer coach at a game. Thankfully, the coach, aware of the situation, politely but firmly refused to get involved. My mother's messages always followed the same pattern. She missed us. She loved us. She didn't understand why I was being so extreme, and couldn't we just move past this unpleasantness? Not once did she acknowledge what they had done, or offer a genuine apology. I maintained the boundaries I'd established. The legal letters had done their job. None of them came to our home or tried to contact Grace directly, but the emotional campaign continued, with my parents positioning themselves as wounded victims to anyone who would listen, through the support group for adults estranged from toxic parents. I learned this was a common tactic, what some members called the missing reasons. My parents genuinely couldn't comprehend why. I had cut contact because acknowledging the real reason would require them to see themselves as people who had harmed a child. That recognition was simply not compatible with their self-image. Understanding this dynamic didn't make it easier. Not exactly, but it did help me stop expecting an acknowledgement that would never come. I stopped hoping for the dramatic moment of realization, the tearful apology, the healing reconciliation that movies had taught me to expect. Instead, I focused on building a life where such recognition wasn't necessary for our happiness. Grace and I established new traditions to replace the old ones. Instead of tense holidays at my parents' lake house, we hosted small gatherings with friends in our apartment. For Thanksgiving, we volunteered at a local shelter before enjoying our own meal with Melissa and her family. Christmas became a cozy celebration just for the two of us, with a trip to a nearby resort for skiing, once Grace was fully recovered. Of course, my Aunt Eleanor remained our strongest family connection, visiting regularly and sharing stories about my grandparents and great-grandparents that helped me understand the generational patterns at play. Through her, Grace maintained a sense of family history and belonging without the toxic elements my parents had introduced. Perhaps the most surprising development was my relationship with Mark. Our divorce had been amicable but distant, with him pursuing his career across the country while I raised Grace. After the incident with my parents, however, he became more present in our lives, calling Grace regularly, visiting when he could, even helping financially with her medical expenses beyond his required child support. I should have been there more, he admitted during one visit. Seeing how your parents failed Grace made me realize I've been failing her too, just in a different way. His honesty and willingness to change stood in stark contrast to my parents' rigid denial. It wasn't a romantic reconciliation. We were both better as co-parents than spouses, but it was a healing of a different kind, a healing of family wounds. As for Grace, she amazed me daily with her resilience and wisdom. She approached her recovery with determination, rarely complaining. Despite the pain and limitations, she processed her feelings about my parents with a maturity beyond her years, expressing sadness without allowing it to define her. You know what's weird, Mom? She said one evening as we walked our neighbor's dog, an activity that had become part of her strength-building routine. What? I think I learned more from them not being in our lives than I ever did when they were. What? Mean I learned what kind of person I don't want to be, she explained. Someone who can't admit mistakes. Someone who cares more about appearances than people's feelings. Someone who makes others feel small to make themselves feel big. Her insight took my breath away. That's a powerful lesson, Grace. Plus, she added with the pride of youth, I learned that when someone shows you who they are, you should believe them the first time. Maya Angelou said that, right? I smiled. She did, and she was absolutely right. That, ultimately, was the most profound lesson from our painful experience. My parents and brother had shown me who they were countless times throughout my life. I had made excuses, normalized their behavior, blamed myself anything to maintain the illusion that they would someday become the loving, supportive family I yearned for. It took their mistreatment of Grace to finally break that pattern and accept the reality. Family is not defined solely by blood. It's defined by love, respect, trust, and mutual care. Sometimes the healthiest family is the one you choose and build, not the one you're born into. Creating boundaries, even permanent ones, with toxic relatives isn't an act of cruelty, but an act of self-preservation, and in my case, the protection of my child. Grace will carry the physical scar of that weekend for life. A faint line on her leg where the bone was repaired, but the emotional scars have healed better than I could have hoped because we addressed them honestly, sought help when needed, and removed ourselves from the source of harm. As for me, I no longer feel guilty about the estrangement from my parents and brother. I no longer lie awake wondering if I'm the unreasonable one, the overly sensitive one, the dramatic one. I know the truth of what happened, and I know that protecting Grace was the only acceptable response. Some relationships can't be repaired because the other parties refuse to acknowledge the damage. Some broken things are meant to stay broken. The real healing comes not from forcing those broken pieces back together, but from carefully collecting the fragments that still have value and building something new, something healthier, something true. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect yourself or someone you love? How did you find the strength to follow through? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if you found this story helpful, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you can do. Thank you for listening. And remember, your worth is not determined by those who failed to value it.